Welcome back to The World This Week, and this is in partnership, of course, with The Daily Beast. During the next hour or so, we're going to be taking a look back at the top stories during the past 7 days. Under discussion today, Donald Trump's maiden international tour. How has it gone? What kind of a reception has he been given? And what has been achieved? We'll also be looking at the attacks in both Manchester and Egypt. We'll also look back at the life and times of a man who, for more than a decade, was none other than James Bond. I'm, of course, talking about Roger Moore, who died on Tuesday at the age of 89. Well, here with me in the studio to talk through all of that is Christopher Dickey, the foreign editor at the Daily Beast. Thank you very much for joining us. Judah Grunstein, editor-in-chief of World Politics Review. Thank you for joining us. Freelance journalist and writer Anne Penketh. And last but not least, France 24's International Affairs editor, Annette Young. Thank you so much to all of you for joining us. Now, first up, if President Trump does say so himself, his first foreign tour since taking office, which took him from Saudi Arabia to Israel to the Vatican to Brussels and to Italy, has, and I quote, been very successful. Trump went on to say, "We made and saved the USA billions of dollars, I should say, in money and millions of jobs." Now, is that a unanimous opinion? Well, let's begin where the tour started, in Saudi Arabia. And let me start by asking you, Christopher, your take on that choice as the first port of call, as opposed to a typical neighboring country like Mexico or Canada, for instance.
Well, it was unprecedented, but I think it was the kind of visit that made Trump very happy. First of all, the interior decor in Saudi Arabia.
The bling bling.
The bling bling is something that he's very familiar with. He loves to talk about money. He loved to think that he was going to make a lot of money. The identification of Iran as basically the great Satan, viewed by the United States and Saudi Arabia and Saudi Arabia's Sunni allies, all of that fit very well into his worldview, to the extent that he has a worldview. And I think he was very comfortable there. When I heard his speech, which obviously he read off a teleprompter, and actually looked like he was tranquilized when he was reading that speech. But when I watched his speech, I thought, you know, the Saudis could have written this speech, and I'm not sure they didn't.
Okay, well, it was, as you say, an impactful speech, and it was a trip that really brought together, you know, three major world religions. Judah, what are your thoughts about how the itinerary was put together?
Well, obviously there was that symbolism top of the list. It was even advertised as the trip of bringing together the three Abrahamic religions. I just wanted to agree with what Christopher said. I was really struck in terms of the speech in Saudi Arabia by the degree to which Trump essentially disavowed not only Obama, but George W. Bush, two presidential strategies in the Middle East. Bush, who really emphasized democracy, even if he pursued it in a ham-fisted way, and Obama, who was trying to, in a sense, unchain the United States from the anchors of its traditional friendships and alliances, so that there could be a little more room to be a more even-handed broker as the region goes through all this upheaval, to try to broker some sort of accommodation between the Saudis and the Iranians. Trump basically has turned his back on human rights as an agenda item entirely, and from the speech in Saudi Arabia, it becomes really clear that his foreign policy is essentially the Saudi foreign policy, with a little bit of the Israeli foreign policy thrown in. To the consternation of the Israelis, he's added Israel-Palestine peace agreement, which doesn't really suit them or suit Netanyahu very well. But to me, what's really striking about Trump is the degree to which he becomes a screen upon which the people he's meeting with imprint their agendas. We saw it already with his meeting with the Chinese president, Xi Jinping, where Trump was breathing fire going into the meeting. And when he came out, Xi Jinping is his greatest friend. And his policy in Asia sort of becomes very accommodationist towards the Chinese. In Saudi Arabia, King Salman is now a very wise man that Trump knows very well. And Christopher probably knows better than I do, and Annette also. But from reports that I've read, King Salman is hit or miss whether he's fully coherent at any given time when you're meeting with him.
Well, Trump should get along with him perfectly. I mean,
the joke makes itself.
Yeah.
Obviously, when he said that in front of the NATO leaders, and talked about his travels, this being his first presidential trip, it wasn't surprising to see them kind of chuckle. They've been around the world a few more times than he has, and they know Salman, they know Netanyahu, and they know that Trump basically got rolled and played in Saudi Arabia.
Let me just bring Anne into the conversation, because he must have chosen Saudi Arabia and Israel, thinking these are two places, perhaps two of the countries in the world that were perhaps the most pleased to see the back of the Obama administration, and therefore would be most likely perhaps to welcome him with open arms.
Well, were they, though? Because if you think back to the Donald Trump of the election campaign, which was only a few months ago, he was saying the most awful things about Saudi Arabia. He was saying, these are the people who throw gays off buildings, they oppress women, and things like that. He was extremely aggressive towards Saudi Arabia. So my take on his decision to make it the first place that he visited, which obviously has huge symbolism, is that I could see that throughout the stops on the way as well. I think the adults in the room in the administration have now, and what's left of the State Department, have got to him. And in fact, what he was saying in Saudi is really quite conventional wisdom. It goes back to the Saudi plan for on the Palestinians and Israel. And then when he was in Israel itself as well, I think as long as he was in the hands of his handlers and minders, he was okay. As long as he's on that leash, everything's okay. But as soon as they are not there, and for example, at Yad Vashem, when he was at the Holocaust Memorial in Israel, and maybe he's just allowed to write the first thing that comes into his head, hey guys, I'm having a great time here.
It was amazing, as he said.
Compared to what Obama wrote in the same place, a few paragraphs talking about never again. So it's to do. I just think that Trump, if he's under control, on a leash, he's okay. But as soon as people turn their backs, he's uncontrollable.
I think that's very true. And I mean, the thing is, I'm thinking about Maggie Haberman, who, of course, is a New York Times reporter who's been following him for a number of years, most recently, obviously, for the Times. And she was interviewed a few weeks ago where she said the thing about Donald Trump, he's influenced by the last person he spoke to. And that's the thing. As long as he sticks to the script, he's okay. When he goes off piste, well, then it's a whole different ballgame. And I think this is the thing about his trip. I mean, all the certainties, all the usual sort of protocols have gone right out the window, even to the point where, NATO people have been told, or leaders at NATO, to keep their speeches short because his attention span is short. I mean, it gives you sort of the idea of what you're dealing with. It's no surprise that he did well, was very comfortable. I mean, he was grinning from ear to ear in Riyadh, and as he took part in the dance, because, hey, he was in a country which loves a lot of gold. And,
just signed some big deals as well.
And he's, and he loves the word, deal, and this is a country that they just made a very big deal with.
And by doing that and by saying those things, he's really firmly nailed his colours to the sort of the Sunni mast, and really isolated the Shia sect. And that's very interesting in terms of timing, because that came just the day after the elections in Iran, when Iran, faced with a more hard-line option, opted for more of the same in the form of the moderate incumbent, Hassan Rouhani. And so basically he's really demonized Iran perhaps more than we've heard in a very long time, hasn't he?
Absolutely. And given the uncertainty that he's created in terms of the nuclear deal and pushing for new sanctions unrelated to the nuclear deal, so they won't actually sink the deal, but they certainly won't create the kind of potential goodwill that could have been exploited at a time when the Iranian people, again, pseudo-elections, it's not a democracy, it's controlled, but they reveal something.
It's more democratic than Saudi Arabia.
Obviously.
Yeah, a lot.
And women can vote.
And it reveals something. And it reveals something about the mood of the Iranian population, and the mood of the Iranian population is to engage with the world. And so essentially I agree with what Anne said, in the sense that the Saudi and Israel part of the trip went well, in the sense when you keep the bar really low, in the sense that he got there and he left and didn't cause a catastrophe. But with any other president, we'd be looking at the policy issues, whether he actually advanced U.S. interests or not, whether he advanced stability and peace in the region. Did he push the people he was visiting on the issues that they need to be pushed on? We saw that he's very willing to give tough love to European democratically elected leaders that the United States is in a collective security alliance with.
In public.
In front of them, calling them out. Not one word toward the Saudis at all about any of the long list of issues that they with which they contribute to the disorder and the chaos that's going on in the Middle East. So again, we're grading on a curve when we say he made it through that part of the trip well, and it was very well planned. But again, I feel like he's linked the U.S. to a losing proposition.
Well, yeah, my concern is that that both Saudi Arabia and Israel will become the tail that wags the dog here. They have their agendas. They're very clear about their agendas. They come together wanting regime change in Iran, basically wanting the possibility of a war with Iran that let's face it, they're not going to do much to fight. That's going to wind up being an American war. Now, is that what Trump wants? I don't think it is what he wants. But I think there are some people, there's a lot of bad blood toward Iran. There's a lot that Iran has to answer for in terms of its expeditionary actions in Iraq and elsewhere, killing American soldiers. The people like General Mattis, the Secretary of Defense, they haven't forgotten. So there's all this bad blood with Iran, but does bad blood make for good policy? Usually it doesn't. And if you've got a president who really clearly does not understand what the hell is going on out there, then you have a truly dangerous situation.
Is it not the case, though, Chris, that obviously the State Department is facing some sort of leadership vacuum at the moment, given that the policy is changing by the second with this man in charge?
Well, I don't think well, yes, we don't know. What can you do with a man who goes around saying that NATO is obsolete, has one meeting and comes out of the meeting saying it's not obsolete anymore? What changed? His mind. Who attacks China and then comes out of a meeting with Xi Jinping and they're best buddies.
But it gets back to what you said. Donald Trump's closest advisor is the last person he speaks to before he steps in front of a hot mic. And in some ways, that's good and bad in the sense that I'd rather it be James Mattis, the Secretary of Defense, who has a huge, lengthy experience in the Middle East, or H.R. McMaster, the National Security Advisor. At the same time, they do have a certain memory and a certain engagement with the Middle East. It's a military memory. It's a military man's memory. They lost lives there. They lost friends. They lost people that they led and that they lived with. That's really hard for those. It takes an exceptional generation of warfighters to become peacemakers. We've seen it in history. We saw it with NATO is an example. France and Germany. And
you've seen it in Israel too.
Exactly. The question is whether those two people, whether those two men are that kind of warfighter, whether Trump will listen to them, who he will listen to otherwise, whether he'll listen to King Salman before he listens to his own national security advisor. I saw one report that in the 1+1 that Trump had with Netanyahu, where they meet together with one advisor, it was a 1+3. So they meet together with three advisors. Trump brought in Jared Kushner and left his national security advisor, McMaster, outside in the waiting room, which is unprecedented. The national security advisor is always the last person to speak to the U.S. president before a major decision is made. And McMaster was left on the outside waiting.
Okay, so there are some concerns. I mean, nothing new. There's been lots of concern for some time about Donald Trump and his ability to read his briefs and get on top of it. But he does have something he can bring to the table, doesn't he? He's a deal maker. And there's a lot of deals that could be struck if the will was there and the deal-making technique was perhaps different, which we think it's going to be. Does anyone here, is there any optimism at this table that Donald Trump is going to bring something fresh to the table, perhaps, when it comes to striking a deal? Perhaps something in the Middle East, peace in the Middle East?
He's a horrible deal maker. He's a horrible deal maker. He's a horrible negotiator. That's a complete myth. I mean, we saw it with China. We saw he's an awful deal maker. Well,
he was an awful deal maker in business too. The only thing he did was to create a big brand. He bankrupted multiple companies. What happens when you start to bankrupt the American government? I mean, can he do that? No, the Republicans won't let him do that. So what he's doing is he goes out, he talks about these great projects he's going to do domestically, for instance, and he comes back and the Republican Party says, oh, you can't do that.
So are we saying that there's no method whatsoever in what he does and what he says? When he shakes something up, rattles everyone at NATO and says they're obsolete, is there any method behind that?
It comes down to his personality, surely, in the end, which we're getting to know quite well now, aren't we? And he's so extremely thin-skinned and slightly paranoid and self-centered and narcissistic, all the things that we've noticed since...
Those are the good things.
Those are the good things.
Okay, we're gonna have to break for the half time in just a moment, but I just want to show the pictures of that handshake because, of course, he's met lots of world leaders during the course of the last few days, not least France's new president, who he heaped with praise, and there was a bit of a bit of a showdown, wasn't there?
I think Emmanuel won.
You think he won?
Oh, you said, is there a method? The method is the people sitting across the table from Trump who have understood that to play him, you flatter him, you give him a little gift in the sense of a superficial concession or deal that was either already agreed to by the Obama administration or represents a net win for their side, like the Chinese did with the beef imports. And then he drops his hostile demands. We saw it with the NAFTA renegotiations. The Saudis have nothing to worry about at this point. So there is a method, and the method is very clearly on the other side.
And we should be relieved about that. I mean, he is brought back again and again towards something that resembles sanity compared to his campaign promises.
Okay, we're going to have to park it there for the time being. We'll be back after this short break when The World This Week continues. Stay tuned.